the nerves and everything run down. That builds up with calcium. It's sort of like an internal bone spur where it's or pipe clogging up with debris, more or less.
Right, and then that causes like nerve pressure, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And nerve pain.
Yeah.
So the spine, like there's a lot, and Ellen, are you our chiropractor?
No, I'm an acupuncturist.
Oh, cool. I know we have a chiropractor in here someplace. So thank you, Alan. I appreciate that. So both of these things, basically what happens, whether we have disc degeneration or spinal stenosis, we are creating compression in the spine in some place, which is causing pain. So compression equals inflammation, inflammation equals pain, right? So we want to try to avoid things that are going to exacerbate compression, inflammation, and pain. Another thing that happens as as these discs are degenerating and we're moving and we're aging and we're starting to, the cells are starting to break down, is depending on our postural patterns, we can get bulging disc. So bulging discs occur when either the disc is pushed, like the jelly is pushed sort of posterior or anteriorly, right? And so people will come into class, and this is actually super common, and it has nothing to do with yoga. People will come into class and they'll say, I have 3 bulging discs. I just want to let you know, I know how to modify. That's typically what they tell me. And I'm like, okay. If they come to me and they say, I want a private, and they tell me they have 3 bulging discs, I'm going to tell them that I need to see like the MRI or the films, their chiropractor. Like I need to see what's going on because I can't work with them one-on-one and give them specific things unless I know what's happening in their spine with their disc. Because the risk of this is if we have a bulging disc, let's say we have a bulging disc and the bulging disc is towards the back of the body, and I start doing things like forward bend, what am I doing? I'm further pushing that jelly to the back of the body, right? So if I have an anterior bulging disc and I am on belly down back bends, what am I doing? I'm pushing that jelly further forward. So do you see what I'm saying? Like when we start dealing with bulging disc, we have to be careful because we can exacerbate it with yoga, and that's absolutely 100% true, okay? Another thing we have to watch out with bulging disc is that if we exacerbate it, what happens next? Hemorrhage, they burst, right? And then it's like, from what I understand, and feel free if you know about this stuff and you want to jump on, from what I understand, you really can't fix that. Like they can do surgical intervention, but it's not going to make you how you were before, right? Once you start doing that spinal surgical intervention, I mean, it's intense and it's not going to ever be the same, right? So when we're talking about spinal things, you really need to sort of be aware, and if you don't feel comfortable, you're not going to do it. Another thing about the spine is, so like if I was working with somebody in yoga therapy and they had a posterior bulging disc, I am going to work with them on things like belly down back bends, because what my hope is that as I bring sort of opening in the front, I'm compressing the back and I'm trying to like bring it back in, right? And I have worked with, not by myself, but with a chiropractor and a physical therapist as part of a care team to help people do that, right? But then I'm consulting those other professionals and saying, if I do that, would that be okay? And they're like, yeah, that should be safe, right? So I'm not just pulling something out of my bag of tricks. So this is what that looks like. So if I'm working with somebody and they have a bulging disc that is bulging back, so it's bulging this way, okay? And I do a gentle cobra, then I'm encouraging that disc to come back in, right? But if I have somebody who has a bulging disc and I put them in like child's pose or a forward fold, I'm actually encouraging that disc to go further out. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. Excellent. And so what we commonly see, like I said, if it's a disc problem, they'll tell us. What we commonly see is people coming in with either anterior tilt or posterior tilt, Or we see people coming in with kyphosis in the upper back. So they're locked long. They've been doing a lot of rounding. Their muscles are locked long. They've been in spinal flexion for a long time. And then they're sort of stuck in this rounded posture, right? So the things that we can do to help them, and I've actually had multiple clients that have asked me to privately work with them for years to prevent, they didn't want to have a hunch. Like they were younger women and they were like, I don't want to have a hunch. I'm a lawyer and I always am hunched. I don't want to have that. So what do I do with them? A lot of like heart opening, a lot of like extension in the shoulders. Like I'm pulling everything back. I'm really opening the front of the body. I want to lengthen the pectorals. I want to like create some space in the front of the body because the back is so long, right? And so these muscles are so short. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create more space, right? You'll also see students that will have a lack of, like they won't have their cervical spine, like we were talking about earlier. They won't have that curve in the cervical spine. And so what happens then is they'll lay on the back and they'll do bridge pose and their neck is literally on the ground. Okay? This is an indication that they need a blanket under them, first of all, but also that they have this, their cervical spine is losing its curve, its natural curve. So what do? We put a couple blankets underneath their shoulders, just like shoulder stand, so that their neck can cascade back, so that there's just a little lift, so that there can be space there. We want to encourage space, right? So never should you see a student in bridge pose with their neck flat on the ground. If you can't slide your hand underneath their neck, they need a blanket. Does that make sense? Okay, any questions about this? Oh, hi, Kelly. So read in a book that rolling up from forward fold potentially exacerbate, yeah, absolutely. So Kelly said, and I really like this, she said, I read in a book that rolling up from forward fold potentially exacerbates a herniated or bulging disc, particularly with osteoporosis. Now again, it depends on if the disc is bulging posteriorly or anteriorly. If the disc is like pushing back towards the back of the spine, then absolutely, because what are we in? We're in flexion. We have to remember that flexion, hey Chris, will you go grab me the spine? So we have to remember that when we are in flexion, right? Flexion of the spine, the front of our vertebrae are coming closer together. When we're in extension, the front of our vertebrae are moving further apart. Does that make sense? So that's flexion, extension of the spine. And then we have axial extension and axial flexion. So we're gonna bring in my elephant. So my children have named this Elefante. And I'll show you why. Because it looks like an elephant. Okay, so here, flexion in the spine, when I flex, I do this. Now, so these guys are coming closer, space is being made between these acromia. Does everybody see that? When I'm in extension, I'm like this. So these guys are compressed, these guys are opening up, yeah? When I'm in axial extension, I'm in a twist, right? And so actually axial extension, Leslie Kaminoff says that axial extension brings more length into the spine. So think a seated spinal twist than it would if you were in regular extension because there's not a compression there. Does that make sense? That's what Leslie Kaminoff says, okay? So we have flexion, we have extension, we have axial extension, and then we have axial flexion. Axial flexion. Okay, so what does that look like in yoga? Tadasana, extension. Okay, and then we go into flexion, forward fold. Okay, we go into axial extension, a twist. We go into axial flexion, up and over, side bend. And so when you do these postures, you can actually feel in your body, oh yeah, I'm getting space in one side, but I'm getting compression in the other. Or I'm getting space in my back, but I'm compressing my stomach, or I'm getting space in my front body, but I'm compressing my back body. And so that's how we can really create a good, like, proprioceptive awareness of how our students or how our yoga asanas are affecting the spinal column itself. Somebody says, are they the same? Are these the same with neck disc? I have not been diagnosed specifically, but I have possible slip disc in neck. So I don't understand slip disc the same way I understand bulging disc and herniated disc. Does anybody want to hop on and give sort of a more scientific explanation of slip disc?
I can give a few tips if you want. So slip disc is kind of just, I guess, a misnomer. A bulging disc and a herniated disc are varying degrees of the same disorder, like we've talked about, how far that disc has been pushed out. And a slipped disc is just kind of a misnomer that floats around for the exact same thing.
Okay, good.
So it's no different than a bulging disc. And I also want to just throw this out just for information for everyone. A lot of people, like patients, for example, for me, a big education piece that I provide is that discs can heal themselves. And just because you have a disc bulge on an image, MRI, whatever you have, doesn't mean like for life you're going to have back pain. That is a really big thing that people come to me with questions about. And it's a common myth, I guess, that's floating around out there, that it'll never go away or it'll never heal. But there's tons of things you can do, exactly like the extensions, an amazing treatment for disc bulge. And that's exactly what we do in physio.
Yeah, perfect. And that's the research that I've done, which is why I feel comfortable working with it, as long as I know what direction it's going in, because I just don't want to exacerbate it. So if they say, well, I think it's anterior, nope. You go ahead and check with, the films, or, you can also work with your clients and ask them to, to sign a release of information with their doctor, and then their doctor will email it to you, but they have to do it. They have to initiate it, at least in America. I can't call a doctor and say, I want somebody's information. But if I'm working with Nina can call her doctor and say, Michelle's my yoga therapist. She can have my information. And then the doctor's like, okay, right? Then I request it and I get it. So yes, great information. So always taught to move up with a straight back. So straight back is also a misnomer if we're talking about misnomers, and I think it's pretty clear why that's a misnomer, because we want that curve in the back. We don't want it straight. So, I've heard teachers say, inhale, halfway lift, flat back, or straight back. Well, we want extension. Extension is what we want, and that's going to still have a curve. There's still going to be a natural curve. So I think that what we want to do when we're coming up from a forward fold, or when we're, doing any of these things, is we want to make sure we have good core engagement. We want to make sure that we're not letting our abdomen sort of hang out, because when we do that, we put unnecessary pressure on the spine, and that can exacerbate anything that's going on there, as it is. Okay. Are these the same with neck disc? I have not been diagnosed specifically, but have possible bulging disc in the neck. Yes. So you can get a bulging disc or a herniated disc in your neck. Again, I've been told that you can heal those things. There are specific tools that chiropractors have that you can get that will help to bring the curve back into your cervical spine. I would recommend that if you have a student, or if you yourself are working with this type of issue, it's worth the time and money to find a good chiropractor to talk to, because, I don't go to a chiropractor often, but every once in a while, my neck will lock up. And typically it happens in headstand. And the reason it happens, I was using that feet up trainer. Has anybody used that? Okay, so it's the little chair, you put your head in and you can like do all these, inversions. But the problem with that thing, why I don't love it, is because then I end up this is me, I don't know about you guys, but I end up dumping in to my shoulder girdle. And what that tells my neck is you're in danger. And so what does my neck do to try to protect itself? These muscles seize and they lock for days. Like I can't turn my neck when that happens. And so when that started happening, I actually started going to a chiropractor, and I threw that chair away and I just said, I will never use it again. And I just stopped doing headstands too, because I felt like if my body was having this reaction, it thinks it needs to protect me. So it's the muscle is locking up because it thinks it needs to protect me. And so why put it in a position that it thinks it needs to protect me in? That's my thinking.
I have to comment on the chair up, the feet up trainer, because I had the same issue. I thought it would be really helpful for my inversions and for my core work. And then I was finding a pinch in my neck that would last for days. And so I've stopped doing it. But it's so, the information is confusing, because I thought it was supposed to help me because I do have shoulder issues and some stuff. So I'm like, oh, this will be great. And I'm finding, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I thought I was doing something else wrong.
No, my theory on it is because when we do headstand and we're doing it properly, Iyengar says you only do one a day, first of all. And the second thing is if we're doing Shirshasana 2 or Shirshasana B, this one, then you've got like 60 to 70% of your weight in your shoulder girdle. It's not on the crown of your head. So your shoulder integrity has to be fierce for you to be in headstand, first of all, right? So, and I don't know, I don't know if Carrie's still on, but I know Carrie does a lot of inversions and handstands and has trained with professionals to do those things. And my feeling is I always start people in dolphin, and then, so once they get dolphin, then we go to Pincha Mayurasana. And once they get Pincha Mayurasana, then I take them to handstand. And once they do handstand, then we can talk about headstand. So that's how I teach it, because Pincha is the safest, in my opinion. Of course, that's my opinion, right? And then handstand's a natural progression from Pincha Mayurasana, but headstand requires so many things that to start there seems counterintuitive to me, you know?
Well, I think a thing that I found, this speaks to like shoulder injuries, right, is starting from dolphin, that alignment, I think is something that I find troubling with my own sort of impingements, and finding the proper way to get to dolphin to start that process. So if you could talk about that a little bit, that would be really helpful.
Sure. So I use a strap. So I teach it with a strap. And then, you know, it's not a great, it might not be the right pose for you. I would have to like work with you, I think. You know, I don't mind working on Zoom with people. I feel comfortable with that. But, you know, I'd have to see some of the stuff you're doing to be able to really tell you. But what I do with people typically is I use a strap, and you measure the strap. The center of your shoulders is where you want the strap to measure to. So this is too long. Oh my gosh, come on, man. This is still too long. It's actually way shorter than you think. So like this is good, right here, okay? Now I'm gonna put this on, and it's gonna be super tight, like really tight. You guys are gonna be like, what? See, it's so tight, super tight. And this keeps me where I need to be. This keeps me locked and loaded. And so I don't have to worry, because what'll happen is if you don't have this, even if you're strong, but let's say you do have some shoulder impingement, what'll happen is you'll start here and you'll go here.
Yes.
Does that happen?
Yes.
Yes. So this is what is going to be your best friend. And what you'll find is if you do it and then you get into dolphin, if you're up against a wall, you kick up, you go right up. Because you've got the stability. It's all about the foundation. You've got the stability.
My strap's been too long.
Yeah.
Looking at how short your strap was, measuring that makes it
will feel uncomfortable. I think when you first start, it does feel uncomfortable. It feels so tight, but then it feels supported once you finally get up there, you know. But remember, you know, these inversions have an element of spinal flexion in them. When we extend, when we hyperextend in the spine, we get that C curve in our back. And that's why people don't stay up. I wish, if Carrie's on, you can pop on anytime you want, Carrie.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh yeah. Okay. So what I think, and this is what I've observed, and then I'll defer to Carrie, but when I see people in inversions, a lot of times I see them hyperextending in the spine, and that's why they can't stay up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like that you have to create such integrity in the shoulders that you can maintain just a little bit of flexion in the spine to keep your shoulders stacked over your hips. Carrie, do you want to add anything?
Well, with regard to headstand, I personally don't think that anybody should be doing headstand. Like, just in general, it's just, I mean, it's fine if you wanted to do like a bound headstand because you're not putting all the weight on your head. But, you know, I study a lot about the brain, and the brain is like the consistency of butter, right? And there's been a lot of I mean, there's no like necessarily scientific proof, but, you know, any kind of blow to the head, you know, they studied like NFL players and whatnot, but anything that blow to the head increases your risk of dementia and Alzheimer's and all kinds of neurological disorders. And so, you know, being someone who's spent many, many years on my head and training and all of that, there were so many times where I just thought, like, I'm putting 140 pounds on my head, and like, is that really just even smart? And like, why? And, you know, go through all of that. And then I just kind of decided, you know, bound headstands, okay, but why? You know, so why is that important? And then with regard to Pincha Virasana, you know, the common thing with Pincha Virasana is that shoulder mobility is the issue. So core strength is also an issue too, and the people's inability to understand how to position their body and stack their joints over their shoulders so that it's stable, because we know that bones are the strongest part of the body. So they'll arch their back to overcompensate for their shoulder tightness. So, you know, I don't even love Pincha anymore either, because I feel like, again, it's kind of like a why, but I do understand that, you know, it gives people a lot of, you know, just pride and self-esteem that they achieved something. And so for that, it's okay. I would never, and I'll tell you why, I would train with a strap as long as your feet are on the ground. But once your feet leave the ground, if you don't have the shoulder strength to be able to hold yourself, even if you're using the wall, you're putting pressure on your collarbone. And I have seen one student kick up with a strap and break their collarbone because your arms are sliding out for a reason. They're sliding out because you don't have the strength to pull them in, to hold them in. It would actually be better to put something between your hands, like a block, so you're pressing in, getting that strength, rather than using a strap to control the lack of strength. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then with handstand, you know, our hands are very intricate, like joints, you know, the wrist, and 27 little bones, and there's a gazillion ligaments. And, you know, personally for me, I've trained with, you know, Cirque du Soleil performers. I've trained with just Russian, like the weirdest people, right? And, you know, it's kind of like, why? Like, I can't stand that handstands are part of yoga, and I'm always like, why? I understand handstands being part of acrobats, and I think that's fun and cool and exciting, but part of yoga, it just, to me, doesn't make sense. But if you want to do it, great, but I just feel like handstands is another kind of silly kind of thing, other than if you just want to do it because you want to achieve something and you want to, it's fun, and that's a great reason, but not so much for the reason of like, oh, I need to nail a handstand in order to like have a yoga practice or whatever it is. We have to be really careful with the hands and the shoulders too, because shoulders, you know, I say this a lot when I'm teaching, is like, shoulders are the gateway to the heart. And so you'll find that when people have heart issues, they've been hurt, which we all have, but people who tend to have a lot of like trauma, childhood pain, all that kind of stuff, they will have very rounded shoulders because it's the body's way of rounding and protecting the heart. So it becomes almost this body shield. So if you don't work on the heart issues and like ever go there, you're never going to fix your shoulders, personally, in my opinion. Like, I just don't think it's possible because it's all connected. And our body forms this sort of a shield for us. And you'll notice that if you ever guys notice, like, and I really apologize if there's anybody on here who's like this, but like the people who have those crazy back bends, who literally can break themselves in half and like put their head between their legs and all of that, do you notice that they're usually kind of crazy people? Like, they're usually like the most intense and the most like they're just passionate, and they're just really like, you know, so it usually matches their personality, is the way your body your body responds to different movements. And I don't mean crazy in a bad way. I mean crazy in a passionate way.
Well, and
sorry, tell me no offense.
No, you're fine. You're fine, Carrie. And I think to speak to that, what we do say from a metaphysics standpoint, from a yogic metaphysics standpoint, is the people who are hyper flexible like that. Like, again, I call it flexi lexi, where they can, you know, go TikTok back and forth, handstand, back bend, you know, all of that stuff. And they just really have that hypermobility in the spine. From a metaphysical standpoint, they say that there is a lack of boundaries. And so when you have a lack of boundaries, you tend to be a little bit more like projecting of your passion, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I get what you're saying about that, right? You know, that it's not a bad thing. It's part of what we're doing with yoga, is learning to contain our energy, right? And so when we're containing our energy, we're working on, you know, some of us already have a lot of flexibility. Maybe we need to work on strength. Some of us have a lot of strength. Maybe we need to work on flexibility. It's a balance between the two, right? So we can't have stability without both, right? So I think, yeah, and we do, I mean, what do we know about the chakras? The chakras are not just like metaphysical spinning wheels. They're plexuses in the body. So these are nerve bundles in the body. So the heart chakra is actually the pericardial plexus. There's two of them on either side of the pericardium that hold the heart. So the pericardium is the bag that holds the heart in between your lungs. And so there are these pericardial plexuses. They look like little hands. So everybody here, I know, has experienced heartache, and everybody has felt their heart being squeezed. That's not in your head. That's real. That is your pericardial plexus sending signals to your heart from your brain that you are experiencing extreme dis-ease in your heart chakra. Like, that is real, you know? So all of the chakra bodies, every single one of them, and Carrie was talking earlier about the consistency of your brain, there is a plexus. The crown chakra is a plexus in the underside of the skull, in between the brain and the skull itself. There's like this layer. I'm not so into neuroscience right now, but I have recently done a little bit of research on it for this reason. And there is a diaphragm plexus at the crown chakra. And so when we get into Shirsasana, the old yogis were stimulating that plexus. That's what they were doing. They were stimulating that plexus. Well, again, a lot of us, with all of this stuff, the technology that we have, we are overstimulated. Oh, thank you. The meninges. Thank you, Roberta. So a lot of us, we're overstimulated in all of our chakra bodies already because of all of this technology. Technology is very vata. It's very space. It's very ether. It's very, you know, there's a lot of movement, right? So I almost feel like a lot of us need more grounding than we need more, you know, additional stimulation. You know, it's like we need to get back into the body. I'm so open up here anyway, because I live my whole life in my, you know, Anjana chakra and my crown chakra, my throat chakra. Well, you know, we're verbal, we're vocal, we communicate, and those are great qualities, but a lot of times then we're not in the body. We're not in the body. So what do we need? Grounding in the body. Yeah.
Well, and Michelle, one more thing too, with training with Circus Soleil performers and these circus coaches, the whole micro bend is, to them, the most craziest and horrible thing that you could ever do with your body. Because, and to a degree, I agree. So I'm kind of in the middle, because I'll say, you know, if you can lock your joint with the muscles surrounding that joint engaged, great. even if you're hyperextending, right? So like my handstand coach, he would have this extreme hyperextended elbow and it would drive me crazy, right? Because I'm like, you should be micro bending. But he explained to me that if I'm micro bending, I am now relying on the muscles and the ligaments and the tendons to hold me in this position. So if I don't lock out the joint, there I'm not as stable, and that made so much sense to me. So sometimes microbend is good if the student is unable to understand how to engage the quadricep or the calf or whatever, you know, around the knee joint or the elbow or the forearm, or they don't know how to protract their shoulders. It's very common. So yeah, microbend is going to be better for you than locking out your elbow and bearing weight on it if you're not engaging your muscles.
Sure. And, you know, I want to add something to that. So my teacher told me when I was trying to learn handstands, she said, you've got to micro bend your elbow. So I did that for years. I did that and I could not get up. I couldn't get up, couldn't stay up, couldn't get up, couldn't stay up. So I actually think it was right after Carrie and I started talking a couple of years ago, I started locking my elbows out and I started getting up. And so then I started looking at the anatomy of the elbow, okay? And I'm looking at the anatomy of the elbow is different than the anatomy of the knee. Because the elbow, so the humerus bone has this little hook at the end of it. And so then our ulna and radius go into that. So there's like that's their hinge, right? So when I lock that out, it's different than the knee joint. The knee joint doesn't have that hook, right? So there's more propensity for me to like hyperextend or like in a way that's going to affect the ligaments and attachments in my knee joint. But when it's my elbow and I lock out to get into a handstand, for example, that if I'm using, like what Carrie's saying, if I'm using my muscles, not if I'm dumping into my ligaments, because if you're not using your muscles, you're dumping into your ligaments. But if I'm using my muscles, then I'm going to be more stable, right? If I'm not using my muscles, then I'm actually going to be dumping into the ligaments, and that's when you get tennis elbow. Does that make sense, guys? Yes? Okay. So fascinating conversation this morning, ladies and gentlemen. I know there's some gentlemen on here too. We are going to be back in an hour. When we come back, I'm going to have my husband come in and he's going to be our model. So go ahead and think about all of the different poses that you would like to see modifications for, or you want to see, you know, maybe done in a way that isn't safe for the body. And we will use it as like workshop time this afternoon, okay? And he'll be our little guinea pig, okay? All righty, guys, thanks so much. Have a great lunch. We'll see you in an hour.
Thank you.
Thanks.